First, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm super excited to be hosting this webinar with Indigo Ag. They are going to be talking with us about soil sequestration, and this session will be moderated by Meredith Leigh, who I'll introduce in just a second. But before we do that, I'll talk slowly because I see we have a few more folks joining us. Just a couple housekeeping items before we jump into the presentation. So, oops, make sure my screen will advance. There we go. This session is being recorded, and after the session, you'll receive a link so that you can share it with other folks and revisit on YouTube, especially if there's things that you missed. So don't worry, we will have the slides and the recording so that you can revisit. So don't be too stressed if you don't see everything right away. And we will be also, Meredith will be asking our panelists some questions, and then we'll open it up so that our panelists will be taking questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature. That will make it much more easy for us to moderate the questions. You can upvote questions so that we can ask the most popular ones first. So please feel free to use that function. It looks like we should have chat enabled as well. So if you want to chat with each other or introduce yourselves, please feel free to do that as well. And you are on mute mode during the session, and we will be answering questions kind of at the end. So feel free to enter them into the Q&A throughout the duration of the presentation, but we'll be getting to the questions at the end. And I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Meredith Leigh from Second Nature to moderate and introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Bridget. Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm Meredith Leigh. I am Climate Programs Manager at Second Nature. We offer a range of programs and services to support institutions of higher education with engagement in the offset market. And one of those services is just relationship building and vetting of carbon offset providers. So we've been really thrilled to be in conversation with Indigo Ag over the last couple of months, learning more about their solution, talking about the ways in which higher ed can engage. And so I'm excited for this opportunity to share Indigo Ag with you guys today. And we'll get started with a poll because we kind of want to get an understanding of who is in the room. So Bridget, if you could launch that poll. We'd love y'all's input just kind of on who's here and what your level of knowledge and interest is in ag, soil ag carbon credits and nature-based solutions. It's only about 3 questions. Please, yes, respond, and we will be able to look at those responses together to kind of get a sense of who's with us today. Wow, a little bit of everybody. This is great. Awesome to see so many researchers in the room. Yes. A lot of planning happening. Great. Open to nature-based credits, totally new. Got some experts in the room. Awesome. Hopefully this is helpful for you, Dan and Max. Awesome. Awesome. Cool. I think we're good. It looks like we've reached a standstill there on responses. But yeah, the goals today, hopefully we'll meet everybody where they're at. We're going to be looking into Indigo Ag's solution as well as all the work they've done in this space. And just hear a little bit more about opportunities for, soil carbon credits. So I will pass it over to Dan from Indigo Ag to get us started. And just really looking forward to this conversation.
All right. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Bridget. Welcome. Thank you for your attendance. My name is Dan Mongeau. I reside in upstate New York. I've been in agriculture my entire life, but professionally over the past 20 years. And what I do with Indigo is really lead the supply portion of our approach in sustainability markets. We'll hear a little bit from Max in a bit. But really what Indigo has done is we've built kind of both a supply and a demand engine for sustainability in both insets and offsets. We're going to be talking primarily around the offset market today. And my role with Indigo is to lead a commercial team to find partners, maybe such as yourselves, introduce what we're doing and find reliable forms of supply. And that's mainly through growers and producers that are adopting practices that we can then quantify through a biogeochemical method and then basically market to buyers. So I'll turn it over to Max to kind of walk through a little bit of that process and an introduction from himself as well.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan. And thanks to Bridget and Meredith and Second Nature. Happy to be here and connect with everybody. Max DuBuisson. I'm the head of impact and integrity for Indigo, currently based in Connecticut, although I've lived variously in North Carolina and California over the years. And my team is involved in the standards and policy side of things, the verification work, making sure that all of the sustainability programs that we do adhere to the highest standards, create the most value for the farmers and for the corporate customers on the other side of the equation, and ensure that we can sort of report transparently and thoroughly about everything that we're doing. I've been with Indigo a little over 5 years, and my background is actually in the carbon market at the Climate Action Reserve, which is one of the nonprofit standards bodies. So spent a decade or so there. I guess since this is largely academic audience, I'm a UCSB Gaucho and Davidson Wildcat. Go Cats. So let's jump on into to the slides in Indigo. So as Dan mentioned, we've got these two sorts of sustainability programs, both the carbon offsets as well as the supply chain and scope 3 programs. We are also, more of a biotech company. We produce microbial soil amendments in the form of seed coatings. These are naturally occurring microbes that help the crops compete or withstand different sorts of stressors and different sorts of systems. We're based in Boston, but we do have folks located all around the world. And in terms of our own corporate sustainability, our 2023 inventory, which was the last one that we publicly reported, was a little over 10,000 tons. We're just about to issue our next ESG report in another couple of months here. And we have been WBCSD members for a couple of years. Next slide. So when we talk about the carbon credits, here's the basic cycle. We start in the upper right there. We work with farmers. They adopt new practices that either reduce their greenhouse gas emissions or increase the amount of carbon that they're putting in the soil. Indigo comes in to provide what we call the MRV, the monitoring, reporting, and verification. So we kind of create the infrastructure, the program through which these farmers can then have their benefits quantified and turned into an asset that can then be sold onto the corporations. So there's corporations on the other side making these purchases, and then that money flows back to the farmers. Next slide. I'm going to turn it back over to Dan, talk more about the grower experience.
Yeah, thanks, Max. So yeah, if you're focusing back on that upper right, what's driving growers to make some of these practice changes and drive this adoption? These are some of the reasons that growers are participating in our program today. So in the upper left here, I want to stress the point of new money. This is kind of a unique opportunity we've particularly seen in the past few months with some of the government programs out there like EQIP, CSP. This is a way to kind of be in a voluntary carbon market where money is independent. So our buyers are working voluntarily to purchase these credits. And we know that growers appreciate the ability to diversify their different streams of income and profitability. And that's something that we're really proud of, that we have kind of this independent voluntary market that's driving value for growers, regardless of commodity prices and the flavor of the day in terms of some of the government programs and their approval cycles. The second thing that Max mentioned in terms of the registry, this verified registry issued credits, what it allows us to do is to command with buyers some of the top prices. So we're selling current credits currently today in that $60 to $80 range. And this remains, Indigo is remaining the only player that's doing this at scale and at that value. In the bottom right, we talked about farmer choice. There's any number of reasons that growers are making these practices listed there. But because we're using more of an outcomes-based and a model approach, this allows growers to participate and continue to do what they need to do. And a great example of this is we're experiencing, a fair amount of rain here in the spring in the Northeast, right outside my window. If that were happening in the fall and a grower would have to still get in and harvest that field and rut up the field and need to do some corrective tillage, in a pay for practice program, they may not be able to receive a benefit because they didn't follow a no-till procedure. But with our program being more outcomes based, we're not excluding growers if they have to do a practice because the weather or their farming requires it. We want growers to continue to be able to farm that the way they need to farm and participate in a program. And then finally, our aligned incentives. To date, we've paid out over 10 million just in our carbon program to growers, and we're guaranteeing that they're receiving 75% of the price paid for the credits that we sold. So we win. We want higher prices for the credits. We want growers to receive more of that, and our incentives are aligned with what growers want to do. Next slide. So what does it mean to be involved? And what does a grower need to work on versus kind of what does Indigo work on? So you look at the left-hand side and we talk about this field enrollment. We need to be adopting a practice change, doing something different than what we've done before. And again, that outcomes-based approach, we're taking a view here where we compare what a grower has done previously to what they're doing now. And ultimately, they go through the cropping cycle. They're giving us that bit of information, how they farmed before, what have their management practices been over the past 4 to 6 years, and what differed this year now that they joined the program. We're capturing that information through what we call data harvest. That's your last bullet there in terms of the management of the data entry. And we developed a program that allows us to kind of capture this at scale with greater efficiency and greater ease to the grower. Once they're in, they really have kind of, given us that depth of acre years of data. What we maintain to kind of file a carbon credit, if you will, is just the next year. What did they do? And we're managing that data in kind of a streamlined effort that allows a grower to get in there and final thousands of acres relatively fast. Then finally, Indigo starts to kind of lead in a little bit more with what we're doing. And Max will talk a little bit more about this in terms of QA/QC, soil sampling, that monitoring and validation. And growers really feel like there's an opportunity to kind of expand what they're doing. And we've seen growers that started out maybe with a small practice, say reducing tillage, move to no-till. And once they've moved to no-till, they've introduced a cover crop. They're starting to see this as another value add to the acre that they're on. Next slide, please. So the crops that we support today are primarily row crops. So you can see any of those listed here. We are working, and eligibility is within the lower 48. And then certainly because it is a model-based and an outcomes-based program, we see benefits to certain practices over others. So planting a cover crop has some of the biggest impact for us in terms of carbon sequestration, no-till. And then we start to see some of these other programs or these other management changes can have a lesser impact, but still a positive impact on what growers are doing. So again, that same gamification, we see growers maybe starting off with reduced till and then changing into no-till and building that confidence in that management strategy on those acres. They start to sequester more and have potential to earn more. And each year the carbon credit is monetized. So it's the same logic as producing a crop on that particular acre. I'm going to turn it back to Max to talk through a little bit of some of the statistics and kind of the geographical range that we've seen in our first 4 issuances. Max?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Next slide. So I'll wrap things up here. You can see this is from our most recent issuance, the 4th reporting period. Those dots represent the different fields. So obviously a lot of concentration, in the upper Midwest, but as Dan mentioned, we are enrolling growers anywhere in the lower 48. We've reached almost 1 million tons of CO2 equivalent in terms of credits issued. That's over 1,000 farmers participated, over 20,000 different fields, 1.5 million acres. On the scientific side of things, more than 160,000 soil samples have been collected and analyzed through the project itself, and then 11.5 million acre years of management data. So it's a huge amount of data flowing in through this software platform. Growers are telling us not only about the current year, but as Dan mentioned, we need to know about historical practices, what was in place leading up to the change. Another thing that we've begun modeling is water. So specifically surface water runoff reduction. So with cover crop planting and tillage management in particular, you can have real benefits to the amount of stormwater that runs off the field. So the benefits are both to the amount of water staying, so you can reduce irrigation use, but also water quality. So you're sending less sediment, less nutrients into waterways. So more than 64 billion gallons of surface water runoff has been reduced. And as Dan mentioned, more than $10 million paid out to farmers. Next slide. Everything we do is grounded in science. We've got an amazing internal scientific team, but we've also put a lot of effort into external scientific collaborations. Just a smattering of some of the different universities and agencies that we've worked with over the years. In some cases, providing some, connecting them with some of our farmers. In some cases, doing field research ourselves. In some cases, partnering together for different grants. Anything we can do to try and make sure that what we're doing is at the best level of science, the current state, but also what can we do to push things forward. Next slide. And then on the buyer side, all of this leads to demand for these credits. Buyers are really interested in both the story around how they can help farmers and help in this agricultural transition. In some cases, it's because that touches their supply chain. So you see some names on here like New Belgium Brewery or Blue Bottle Coffee. They have an agricultural footprint and they were interested in sourcing credits that kind of align with that. And in other cases, companies like Microsoft, one of our most recent purchase announcements, it's not part of their supply chain, but they're just interested in building a portfolio of really high quality credits that that make a real impact, not only in the carbon, but also again in these co-benefits beyond the carbon. And then finally, there's a few different ways in our view that that we'd love to engage with higher education. One is, of course, purchasing credits. It's a great opportunity. A lot of schools are going to be located in areas where we have farmers. Some schools have their own land, so if you want to collaborate on what can be done on that land to put it into, say, a sustainable sourcing program or enroll it in the carbon project, something like that, or other opportunities to just collaborate and research. And I believe that's it. There's a QR code if you'd like to buy some credits right now. Of course.
Amazing and clever, whoever put these slides together. And also I love this is what 1 metric ton of CO2 looks like. I've never seen what 1 ton of metric CO2 looks like. So thanks Indigo Ag for that image.
You're welcome.
And thanks for the great overview, you two. I think some of our members know that I come from agriculture and I spent many years consulting with farmers who were trying to farm regeneratively or working to transition, and carbon credits came up, but there was nothing like Indigo, or Indigo was in its very early stages in those times. And so it's just really exciting to see all the work that you've done over the years and the amount of impact that you're having. So I think what we're going to do next is dive into the weeds a little bit with you, if that's cool, asking a few questions and just having a little bit of discussion. And of course, folks are welcome to add their questions in the Q&A panel. I believe the chat is also active if you'd like to interact with each other, and Bridget is going to be helping us monitor all of those things. And so I guess you know, obviously we have the entire carbon credit market, and then within the carbon credit market, we have nature-based solutions, and they have come under a lot of scrutiny in recent years. And so I guess I just want to get our conversation started off by exploring the opportunity for soil carbon sequestration within that nature-based category. Can you tell us a little bit about what makes soil unique in terms of an opportunity?
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the great things about soil is that it's very large scale, right? There's a huge amount of agricultural land around the world where there's opportunity to change management and put more carbon in the soil. And it's also very immediate. So I can plant a tree today. We should all be planting trees today, but they do take time to grow. Um, or we can invest in direct air capture. Maybe that's something we should be doing too. But again, it's going to take time to reach scale, whereas we can have immediate impacts if we start planting cover crops and putting carbon into the soil. Um, it's also, it's so tied to the rest of the economy and all the systems that touch our lives every day, our food system and, our fiber and now increasingly fuels. All of these things are coming back to activities on the land. So we can have this impact that really permeates throughout the rest of the economy, and it's really kind of important to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's another aspect here in terms of like why now in the carbon market is the science has really come a long way. So, I've been started working in the carbon market in 2008, and we had a number of different attempts at agriculture, and they tended to end up being very sort of narrow. It's like, well, this is what we're ready to measure today, or this is what we're ready to model today. But the cropland, it's so complex, and you need flexibility for the farmers to adapt and grow crops in rotation and these sorts of things. And so I think we're at a point now over the last decade or two, much more data available for validating the use of biogeochemical models and even advances in just the policies of the carbon market, allowing for these new ways to kind of aggregate farmers together into projects so that you can make a kind of feasible project.
And I would add to that, I think what I see from just interacting with growers and producers is just this group, in their own words, I think would identify as some of the, natural conservationists on their own. I don't think any grower wants something that they put out in their field to disappear and to go someplace else, go to a bay or to a watershed. Um, I think a lot of the practices that are being employed are, have a really good storyline, in terms of what growers are trying to do, the list of benefits in terms of soil health. And I think that scale piece that Max talked about, if direct air capture, the infrastructure exists in agriculture. The drills are there, the planters are there. In some cases, some of these practices is the absence of a moldboard plow. I think having the utility and having the practical application to go out and start doing this at a small scale the next day, along with kind of keeping that profitability and keeping these practices the same on a farm, make a ton of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And can be affordably implemented, certainly. Yeah, and in many cases. So yeah, my experience with this is that many growers were already doing this, and like the carbon markets were a way to incentivize that type of action. But I want to talk a little bit about everything that Indigo's done in order to like make that possible. Because when I was doing this work, it was like farmers are like, well, I'm already doing no-till. How do I get rewarded for that? And so what you developed is like this massively aggregated project where you're doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So can you talk a little bit more about how you talked about the crediting cycle, but can we dig in a little bit deeper to that, how that works? What's the experience for the farmers, and what's the experience for the buyers in that like full cycle?
Sure. Dan, you want to maybe talk about the farmer experience, and I can take it from the Indigo side?
Yeah, happy to. So I think when we approach, growers either, with an individual employee partner that we've partnered with, and the conversation ultimately turns into, what has a grower done, right? So we have this ability to kind of look back in the past year of their crop cycle and say, have you done anything new? Have you adopted a new practice change that we need to be, aware of? And I think those big buckets, you can kind of find some of those, the cover crop, the reducing till, the no-till. And I think the story here is really, just identifying what growers may have done and then what direction are they going. And what we're fixating on here is really finding that differential. As I said, we run this model twice. It's kind of as is, business as usual. And then with this new practice change, and it's that delta that we quantify that we actually pay on. So all this to say, we're focused on that point of additionality. Now, growers, I think, have a strong preference to say, like, and they may unnecessarily disqualify themselves and say, well, actually, I've planted cover crops in the past. I do that on my soybean years. It's not on an individual basis, it's on a field level basis. So the first thing that we want to make sure that growers understand is that, if they're picking up new ground or if they've tried something and it's failed in the past, there is an opportunity in a lot of those categories to find additionality for themselves. So if you've been a long-term cover cropper and it's just been a rye, add a legume. That's another form of additionality. Extend the season, terminate it a little bit later. So there's opportunity to find additionality, and we want to work with you to do that, to kind of create this value. The second thing is, I think growers just need to be aware of the data that they're providing. In a lot of cases, their crop management plans are kind of what they follow. But as much as a grower can start to archive and have good record keeping, we try and make it as easy as possible. We use a lot of the satellite imagery to suggest, we think you planted corn, then soy in this area. We think you probably planted around this date. We try and reduce that data burden using a lot of satellite imagery, and to Max's stats around 11.4 million acres of data. We infer a lot of things to make it easier for those growers. But that's the overall practice change, and then identifying it in kind of a data asset as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and on the sort of technology side of this is happening through a software platform that we've built for the management data collection. It's evolved immensely since we first rolled it out. And in the early days, 5-6 years ago, as we were starting to design the software, we were going out and doing kind of field days where we would meet with the farmers and say, here's the kind of data we're going to collect. Like, how do you keep this data? Like, what do you have? And really trying to learn, like, where are these records? What sort of things can we ask for? What is, you might not know that you're going to ask for something seemingly, minor, but the growers just won't have it. And it might turn out
Mm-hmm.
that you don't really need it, or you can infer it from something else they do have. So we've really evolved, and I think, as Dan mentioned, like, the process for entering the data has gotten faster and faster each year. So now it's a matter of minutes for the returning growers to update with the new year. Once those data are coming in the background, we're running what we call our data validation service. So there's requirements within the protocol, the soil enrichment protocol from Climate Action Reserve, about what types of data you use for what and what data points you need. And so our system is bringing in remote sensing and government data sets and agronomic sort of ranges of reasonableness, and checking and looking. And a lot of what we're able to do in some cases is just catch errors. Maybe the person meant to type 10 and they typed 1,000, and we can say, I don't think you put that much fertilizer, on your field. And they say, oh, I can fix it. If they do have something unusual, they can also add evidence and documentation that we can review.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives us management data. We collect that on every single field. And then there's the soil data itself. So a subset of the fields that enroll each year, we, during the spring, send out soil samplers to collect soil cores. Those go to a laboratory, and then the results come back. And then those are used essentially as the starting point for running the biogeochemical model. So we have the DayCent model developed out of Colorado State University, same model that's used in the U.S. National Greenhouse Gas Inventory for the land use change modeling. We are able to take the data that we collected on the field, translate that into the inputs that the model needs to see, and then use that soil sample as that initialization point, and then model both the baseline and project scenarios to see, what that delta is. There's some additional, equations that we apply from from the protocol, but all of this happens in code. So we have, what we call our emissions pipeline. None of this is, taking place in Excel spreadsheets or anything. And so it does make verification in some cases a little more challenging. We need to walk the verifiers through, show them in the code, here's where everything is implemented. But also, it's like a factory. This is the machine does this. You put in the inputs, you get the outputs. Once you can be confident that the machine does that thing, then you can move on. You don't need to look at every single piece of information going through it. So all that comes together. We're accounting for the leakage and uncertainty. Those come off as deductions. We put a certain number of credits into a buffer pool that's held by the registry for permanence management. And then that final verification goes to the registry. They review it and they issue the credits to Indigo. On our end, we also hold some additional credits aside, again, as a permanence management tool that we can be more flexible with because it's in our account. We can see, how are growers going over time, how are fields coming in and out. But otherwise, at that point, we're able to then deliver the credits directly to the buyers. Some buyers have their own registry account. They just want us to transfer them the credits. Many of the buyers have us retire the credits on their behalf. So that's kind of how they get used. So that's all public in the registry. You can see all the credit retirements that we've made and who they were for.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot. So the grower's responsible for farming and entering their data, and you kind of do the rest.
That's right.
And I'm sure, and I'm seeing a lot of questions coming up about the specifics of that process, as we go. So I wonder if we can, and I think this will help if we go a little bit deeper into the methodology a little bit that you're working with and talk about credit quality. I know that with nature-based credits in general, like permanence is of a concern. And there's how do you deal with leakage? Like, what are some of the ways that you have worked to minimize the risk associated with this particular project type or category of credits? And some of that I think will have to do with the soil enrichment protocol, but some of it also has to do with the way Indigo is kind of managing the cycle. So yeah, would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, you're right. So a lot of this is handled at the protocol level. And we did participate in that process. So in 2020, we worked with TerraCarbon to author VM42 with the VCS program at Vera, and then also participated in the development of the soil enrichment protocol with the Climate Action Reserve. They're very similar. And they try to address these things in a standardized way as much as possible. So leakage, for example, there were sort of two sources of potential leakage that were identified. One is if the yields decline, like if you adopt a practice that then causes the fields to produce, less corn, are you going to then have to increase production elsewhere to make up for that shortfall? And so in that case, what we're doing is looking at the yield crop by crop within the project over multiple years and looking at the yield of the same crop within the local region over the same period of time. And you sort of see, okay, before we implemented these practice changes, how did we stack up? What's that ratio of, how these fields performed on average? And then we just track that ratio over time. And so if you see that drop, then we have to start taking a deduction on our credits to account for that potential emissions leakage. But if it's just, a yield decline due to weather, the region will see the same yield decline. It's not because of the practice changes that they adopted. And in most cases, these practice changes are going to make the fields more resilient to bad weather. So they should usually do better in bad weather than the regional average. And then the other is livestock. So if they were grazing on the field and it gets displaced somewhere else, basically we account for that as if the livestock were still on the field. In terms of permanence, it's a number of layers here. So one is that we do have a vesting schedule for our payments. So the growers get half the payment, up front was the schedule, and then it gets vested over time. We are moving a little bit on how that works, but it's still kind of vested over a period of time to provide an incentive for them to stay in the program. We're also, these practices, you start to build additional benefits the longer you do them. So as you build soil health, again, the crop becomes more resilient. In some cases, you're able to reduce input costs, and in some cases, eventually increase yields. And so the idea is we're making a transition to a different system that doesn't necessarily rely on the carbon credit payment, years into the future, so that once they're out of the project, they're going to want to keep doing it. If a field does drop out of the project, we continue to monitor them remotely. So we use remote sensing to look at management changes that might cause soil disturbance. And we continue to report on those fields, and will continue to report on those fields for 100 years after they drop out. So in this fourth reporting period, for example, we reported 71 tons of credits, like reversed from fields that had previously dropped out, as compared to the 630,000 that were newly issued.
Interesting. Yeah. And so the farmers don't actually have to sign up for 100 years of doing this practice. Like, to be clear with the audience, it's 1-year contracts. Is that what I understand for the growers?
Dan, you want to talk about the farmer commitment?
Yeah, so the farmer commitment is signing a contract. The contract is good. It auto renews for 5 years, but a grower can get out at any time. If at any point they say we don't want to participate anymore, they can walk away from the program. Any future vests would leave with them, so they would not be able to capture those future vests if they were to leave the program. But it's a pretty easy application process, putting boundaries in, attesting that you have control of the ground. It's not even land ownership, that you do manage the ground. And we have a minimum acreage amount that we like to have access. There's not a minimum field size to enroll, but we ask that growers do have access or manage 150 acres to participate. And the reason for that 5 years is, again, kind of part of this permanence and us being able to monitor it, and using the vesting schedule as a way to kind of manage and get rid of clawback. So at no point do we come after growers and ask for money back. If the field were to be tilled, we don't come back and say, we got to take this back from you. That 5-year contract and that 5-year vesting schedule allows us to adjust for that. And I see a question coming up from Todd in the chat here asking, are they compensated for the demonstrated change prescribed by the code? Or is it measurable improvement? And it is the latter. It's that measured piece. And I think this question is a really good one to kind of get at how we describe it. So I think there are a lot of programs out there in agriculture that I would define as kind of pay for practice. Do no-till, plant cover crops. Plant cover crops get $40 an acre. Do no-till, get $3 an acre. Our program is not that. It is the outcomes based. So what it allows us to do is say, all right, if you're going to do this practice and it differs from what you've done before, and we have a calculator that growers can come in and look at this. I've been a long-term conventional tiller, but I'm thinking about going to no-till. What does that do for my particular county and state? I can estimate what my earnings would be based off of this practice change being run through the calculator. The point I want to make of why we like this approach and why I think it resonates with a lot of growers is that perfect example of, I had every intention to potentially plant a cover crop this year. And I've done it with Indigo with you guys for the past 3 years, but I couldn't get it in. It was too wet. The crop came off too late. You're not kicked out of the program or in kind of a pay for practice. You wouldn't get the money for doing that. What we're asking a grower to do is still tell us what happened, but we'll run it through the model and see if you sequestered anything. Maybe that happened this year and you didn't plant the cover crop, but you were able to kind of, continue your no-till, and running that through the model. You may still sequester or abate a certain amount of greenhouse gases and that produce a carbon credit, but maybe it's just not as much as you've done in previous years. So it's very similar to kind of thinking about it from a crop standpoint. If you're missing management practices, yield may go down or suffer, but you're not kicked out of the program. You're not booted from the program.
That's great. And this is obviously pretty complex, everybody. So I think Dan and Max are doing a great job kind of giving us like the brief overview. And I think it's important to know, like, with this that there's power in numbers, right? The aggregation of the project and of fields makes it less risky for individual farmers as well as buyers to participate and know that there are fewer risks associated and higher quality credits involved. And so I think before we go on to the next question, there are quite a few questions about the specific things that you're looking at within the soil. So if you wouldn't mind touching on that quickly, I think that would round out this part of the discussion.
Sure. So at the moment, the samples that we take for the project itself are 30 centimeters deep. Some of our research trials, we've experiment with fields where we do much more dense and deeper sampling to understand what's going on. But with those samples, we're looking at carbon concentration, bulk density, pH, and soil texture. And so all of those things then can go into the model itself and how it characterizes the soil. We do also have, we're always looking for new technologies, new sampling approaches. We published or participated in a study with Yardstick last year. They were testing out their probes. It's a spectral probe that's sort of taking spectral readings as it goes down into the soil column. We're not yet using that commercially in the project, but I think technologies like that are really exciting, have the opportunity to greatly reduce the cost and potentially greatly increase the number of samples. But it all comes back to accuracy and uncertainty. So within the accounting for the project, we're accounting for this sample design error, measurement error, and then model prediction error. In the case of using a model, that's sort of the bulk of the source of the error, but you get this total project-wide accounting for error, and then we are uncertainties basically deducted in what's called a probability of exceedance approach. So if you take our estimate of how many credits we should get, and then you make a distribution based on the amount of error, we get credited at the 30th percentile of that distribution. So we can be 70% confident that we are underestimating the number of credits.
Got it. Got it. That's really exciting about the yardstick and other types of things. I remember when dry combustion was like the only thing anyone would trust. I imagine it's the thing that people trust, but
it is.
It's good to hear that
yeah.
Someone with a lot of experience and all of that is feeling hopeful about some of the other approaches. And obviously that doing this work is what makes better data available, which is what makes better models. So I think that that's a kind of a huge bid for participation, participate in the work in order to improve the outcomes.
The other thing I would add there
on
the sort of participation for this audience is, we would love if anybody's doing soil, research in ag and is interested to know, how can they make sure that their results are the most useful for pushing the market forward and bringing higher integrity. Like we would love to talk about that. What are we looking for in validation data sets and that sort of thing. Even if it's not a direct collaboration, we're happy to be a thought partner.
Great. That was my next question is of all the ways that so higher ed has all these assets when it comes to climate action. So they're decarbonizing themselves and they're, abating their own emissions. They can buy credits, but they can also help with research, or there's tons of interest in student engaged or student applied learning with soils. So what opportunities are available? Does Indigo provide any of this massive data that you have to other researchers or entities? Do you enter into projects with researchers to help you answer your core questions? Can you just talk about some of those other opportunities for engagement?
Yeah, we've kind of done multiple things over the years. So we're doing a little bit less of our own owned field trials for this stuff. We took some of the field trials that we were operating and have turned them over to the Soil Health Institute for them to manage. But we are still doing a number of field trials. We're part of a couple of different grants. So, we're interested in being a part of collecting the data, but we have also had data sharing arrangements in the past with NGOs or academic institutions. So happy to talk to folks about it. Obviously we have a strong interest in protecting farmer data and farmer privacy, but we've been able to find ways to share data sets that have been useful for folks. Otherwise, I mean, I think there's other things that we can explore. Every year, for example, when we're working with so many farmers, right? More than 1,000 farmers, all these acres across the U.S. Indigo doesn't have a person in every county that we operate in, but there are colleges and universities all over the place, and even just engaging in helping farmers with data collection or things like that could be really interesting learning opportunities and ways to engage.
Fantastic.
But otherwise, I think some universities, as we said, have their own lands, and we could participate in helping make those more sustainable and generate revenues, or just
Yeah, that's fascinating. We've looked into like forest carbon projects with higher education, just as second nature, and it's so often it's like the juice isn't worth the squeeze in terms of the amount of land and the amount of effort that goes into it. So have you had any universities or college campuses enrolled in, do you have any college universities enrolled in the project, your project, or would that even be a possibility? And what's the smallest unit of land that's involved in your aggregated project? For some of our campus contacts out there that are like, oh man, I've been through this before and it's just not worth it.
I would maybe just break it into two categories. So definitely in terms of the research side, like there's plot level, research plot size opportunities from a college or a university participating and kind of being a participant in our program. Not that I know of, but absolutely there's an opportunity there, particularly if they're doing some of these practices. And in terms of like the smallest amount, I just go back to the contract and say, hey, if you can manage 150, we're happy to have you be part of that, that group and to join. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity on the research side. I think there's a fair amount of opportunity coming from a land grant myself, of the research that's done, and connections through cooperative extension. We do have some strong partnerships with some land grants that have maybe worked in climate smart, and have connections to growers that for any number of reasons may have adopted cover crops in the past 12 months and should be part of a program. So they've been strong advocates of our program and kind of introducing those individuals. The other piece, just to kind of build a little bit on what Max was saying in terms of data privacy. We are a member of ADT, so Ag Data Transparent. Our contract's posted online. We've answered 11Q, kind of there's 11 questions that they ask. So I'd encourage anybody here that has questions about that, how we are stewards of our growers' data. Please visit that website and kind of see how we respond to that. And then the other piece, just to kind of tie a bow around the research opportunities, I think the most important piece, it kind of goes back to the question that Todd had asked here of this like pay for practice. We are, the project is open-ended, and because it's science-based and not just do this one practice, we believe it works and we're going to pay you for it, but that there is a biogeochemical model. It allows us to adopt new practices. So we do have collaborative agreements where we're looking at what are the impacts of some biologicals on carbon sequestration? What are the impacts of enhanced rock weathering? And working with partners to develop a robust and repeatable, data set that suggests, yes, this does in fact have an impact, allows us to go through this calibration and validation of it and incorporate it in with approval of CAR to say the scientific community has looked at this. We've done the science behind it. We can use a model to predict what the impact is on this. That allows us to kind of open up new forms of additionality. So today we're focusing on, yes, cover crops and no-till. With some of the research that we're doing, we're hopeful that there will be biologicals that have a positive impact on this that we can model and say, hey, if you add this particular biological, it is a form of additionality, or enhanced rock weathering does X on this particular soil type and texture. So we're looking for people to partner with us. And also to that degree, if there are people already looking at this, we would love to kind of provide some specifications around what we would need and what CAR would be looking for in terms of the type of scientific rigor to get these things through calibration and validation as well.
Fascinating. That's great. All right, well, we have a ton of questions, so I kind of want to make some time for some of the like word for word questions in the chat. Is there anything else that y'all would like to add before we launch into a Q&A space?
One point that I don't know that we've really hit is early on, I think you talked about farmers that are already doing some of these practices and how, Dan talked about additionality and how we need farmers to be doing new things. And we've been pretty focused on the carbon credits, but on those supply chain programs, those offer great opportunities for the farmers that are early adopters are already doing this because in those programs, what the company who's buying that physical grain or fiber is really interested in is the inventory. What's the actual impact and not necessarily the a counterfactual change, which is what we're using to create a carbon credit. And so through those programs, we're able to offer opportunities for those growers and keep them incentivized to keep doing what they're doing and to, again, start to do more.
Awesome. That's a good point. Thanks for bringing us back to that. We've got a few technical questions I wonder if we could hit on first. And this actually came up through the registration too, is that folks are really interested in hearing about whether there's like a saturation point for soils. And I know it varies greatly across soil types, but could you talk a little bit about that like carbon saturation of soils and how you account for that in your program?
Sure. Generally speaking, in the heavily managed U.S. cropland that we're talking about here, carbon saturation in soil sounds like a great problem to have. Like I
Right.
don't think, I don't think we're getting near that now. It might vary obviously by soil type and region a bit, but what's happening in the biogeochemical model, there is a sort of spinning up from using the conditions that were in place prior to the practice change. We've got a soil sample that tells us where we are, and then it is accounting for crops, different type of crops differently, different practices differently, all the different biogeochemical mechanisms that are happening in there. So, some of these practices, cover crops, it's a pretty quick response in the soil. You got this new photosynthesis factory putting carbon in the roots, putting it in the soil. Others like tillage, it might be a slow start and then kind of take off for a number of years and then level off again. And these are the kinds of, response curves that we would expect to see coming out of the model itself. And so that grower would earn not a lot of credits at first, but then they would really increase and earn a lot more credits, and then it might taper off again in later years.
Yeah.
Going
So
to be a
you're
little
saying it's
different
responsive to what's actually happening. Yes.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And then I think there was a question about how do you capture the specificity, I guess, with pertaining to cover crops, like different plants are sequestering carbon at different rates. And it really just, I think the answer would be the same. It's like due to the measured difference. But I think, yeah, do you want to talk about how the models are sensitive and measurements are sensitive to the variability across practice, across crop, across species, whatever?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Dayscent can model something like 90 different crops, but we only use it for that subset in the slide that Dan spoke to earlier, because that's what we have data to validate Dayscent's performance on. I remember early on one of our scientists that helped develop the model saying you could grow soybeans on a sponge with Dayscent, but the error bars would be huge. So it really comes down to this model validation process. And the model validation reports are public. We've got a list of all the data sets that went into it. But if you think we've got crop groups, crop functional groups, and climate zones and practice changes. And the combo of those three things together, we have to have published data sets on that combo for each combo that we have. And so we're looking for data sets everywhere that we can to see somebody who was, sampling the soil, getting results, and then we can see, how does Dayscent do? How does it compare against these published data sets? And all of the, the performance of the model itself is in the report, and then all of that results in that quantification of uncertainty. But through that process, if we don't have sufficient validation data, you might get very high uncertainty, or you might end up with, a data set that produces bias, so we can't really use that. So we have to show that it's not biased. But we've gone through 3 different rounds of validating the model and having the model validation reviewed and approved. And each time we're incorporating more data into that process. So for example, our first reporting period, we didn't have cotton in the project yet. Then we were able to expand after we got more cotton data in. Then in the early first few reporting periods, we were only using the model for soil carbon, and we were using the default equations in the protocol for the nitrous oxide and the methane. But we were able to get more, again, validation data with direct nitrous oxide emissions. So now we're able to use DayCent for the direct nitrous oxide emissions. And the benefit of this for the farmers is it's much more sensitive to how they, for example, apply their fertilizer than like a default IPCC equation could ever be.
Sure. Fascinating. Okay, switching from technicalities to kind of, I guess, engagement. There are quite a few questions in registration about communicating the benefits of this type of work to communities, lay people, non-farmers, and also to students. So if you have any tips or insights to share there, I think our audience would be interested.
Yeah, I'll start out by saying from a commercial standpoint, would be more than happy to engage. Thinking about webinar opportunities or introductions to some of our partners that are probably, just agricultural pillars in the community. So some of our biggest partner names working with Corteva and Growmark, those things exist, particularly, in the Midwest. If there's an opportunity for us to engage with any of the participants or attendees today in terms of research or looking at some of their own ground, particularly around that area, if it's a community of growers, around the university, we would be more than happy to make some of those introductions and kind of explain. We traditionally kind of work through partners, but we'd be more than willing to put on webinars, ad hoc to service the questions, and also are more than happy to send out, some materials around exactly what it would look like for a partnership with Indigo, as well as what it would look like for growers to participate with us and sign up for the program as well.
I think that would be helpful, and we'd be happy to send out any additional resources that you have to the audience after the webinar. Any final thoughts? We've got like 2 more minutes before we close.
I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to, the carbon is sort of a means to an end in some ways.
Right.
We're really trying to, again, make the agricultural system more resilient, make farmers' businesses more resilient. The carbon revenue provides revenue stream that's not coupled to commodity markets. And so it allows them to kind of spread out their risk a little bit and not have all their eggs smashed by the markets. And I think some people, I don't know, some people don't like carbon offsets. I've been dealing with that again since 2008. I spent a lot of time speaking to small forestry associations and manure conferences, and I had to let people know, like, it doesn't really matter if you believe in carbon credits or whatever, but this is a mechanism whereby, corporations are paying people to do good things that's really helping their farm, helping the communities. And so the outcome is so positive.
And I think it's a similar message for producers and for growers as well. I think, understanding how this works, it takes a little bit of time to think about this as kind of a different crop. But I think if you present this to growers as kind of market opportunities and a way to commoditize something else off of that acre, it starts to make a little bit more sense. And I am consistently impressed with the ingenuity of farmers and producers to think about this in different ways and try unique things. Many of them are solving other problems in addition to this. And I think when you explain it as an outcomes based and that their potential is only limited by their imagination and how they start to incorporate these things, we've seen some really ingenious ways of thinking about becoming a carbon farmer, which is exciting.
That's great. Thank you so much, both of you. It's been great to be in conversation.
Yeah, thank you all. And we will try to compile some of these questions. And when we send a follow-up with the recording, we can maybe answer some more and add some of the resources that Dan mentioned. So thank you so much for all these awesome questions and your interest and for attending with us today. And thank you to Meredith, Max, and Dan for all of your contributions and the wonderful conversation. And yeah, thank you all for being with us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.